Hello. Welcome to my first quarantine video, trapped in my parents' house. As you can see, new setup, and luckily the babies are still with me. And today we will be doing the second book of the KingKiller Chronicles, The Wise Man's Fear. It's supposed to be a trilogy, but there's no word on when the third novel will be published. Apparently it's already been written, we're just waiting on publishers. I don't know, but for now, I'm happy with what we have to work with. So let's jump right into style and pacing. The style it's what drew me into the book in the first place, and it's here again. It's gleefully dramatic, a silence of 3 parts, and it's lavishly rich. It has a lot in it, and it exists in this world and only in this world, and I got rewarded for my second purchase again and again. This book was a long one, and that prose was there throughout. It never wavered, it never disappeared for a while and became simplistic. It was always there, and I always enjoyed it. The pacing, on the other hand, the pacing is weird here. We still have that problem with tension that we know this character is going to survive, and we know he still has all his limbs. So the tension is weird. We don't expect him to die, but here tension is built by other things. The problem is it never gets followed through on. I'll explain that more in the spoiler section, but the tension was weird here. The pacing was weird around the tension. It's like we went on a bunch of side plots in an RPG where the main quest was actually the thing we were going for. The tension was in the main quest, and we just spent a lot of time on other things. So I think it'll be no surprise that my sugar again is the world and the prose that goes with it. It's beautiful. We get to see more of the world in this book, and I loved it. I loved it all the way. It's unique. You can kind of see where it draws from reality, but it does something more with it than just stereotypes or Planet of the Hats. It really does a lot with building the world and the prose. The vinegar, I think, is no surprise, is the pacing. The tension is weird, and I struggled to get invested in the plot, because as soon as I am invested, Quoth wanders off, and then I'm left without much of a story to go for. Then, would I recommend this book? Once again, yes to the series as a whole. This book was leaps and bounds better than Name of the Wind. The story gets going a lot faster. The character is much more consistent, and yeah, I loved it so much more. And if you're wavering and thinking, yeah, maybe because the third book isn't out yet. I mean, that's why I'm not finishing the Game of Thrones series, because it's not complete yet. I don't think that's a problem here. The second book ties everything up into such a nice little bow that all the storylines kind of reach their end, and I don't think it's an issue that you'll be left on a cliffhanger and waiting for the third book. I think if you are interested in all in this world, don't wait on the third book in the trilogy, just go for it now. The second book is well worthwhile, and you'll get enough of this world to be satisfied. So then, this book is a little bit different in one way. It's a lot more sexual. There's no sexual content in the first book, and the second book there's definitely a lot more, but it's not explicit. It never goes into detail. It's very poetic in his handling of sex, and Quoth is he's a changed man after he has sex with a literal fairy tale, like almost sex goddess, I would say, sort of figure. So obviously I think that would change a man. She is magical and stuff. But it's interesting the way he gains confidence in everything. He's 17 now, and he's much wiser in the ways of men and women. So for the rest of this review, I just want to make it clear I'm focusing on the past plotline. The current plotline is boring, pointless, and kind of annoying. It just doesn't matter. It's filler to the rest of the story. The real story is Quoth as the 17-year-old going on adventures. Old man Quoth in his inn. I know. So let's talk about characters. There are a lot of side characters here. All of them interesting, unique, realistic, with some depth to them. They're not one-dimensional or two-dimensional even. They have a lot to them. Pros and cons and their own biases and races and histories and everything. And that makes them all very interesting. But we don't spend a lot of time with any given side character. So mainly we're focused on Quoth. And he is much more consistent in this book as compared to the first one. He is witty and charming and intelligent to a fault. He has this fiery passion inside him which boils over into rage more often than not. And that's also the passion that allows him to be such a good artist, such a good musician. He uses his teachings from the Arcanum, his magic, much more often. He's much more resourceful. He makes much more sense as a character. And I really enjoyed him. I enjoyed his mischievous side. I enjoyed his sense of humor. The decisions that he made, for the most part, made sense considering the circumstances. So I really understood, connected with, and loved this character. This feels like a person you would want to get to know and befriend. Even if it is true that, as some of the other characters say about him, he is a little bit of a wild child. He's not somebody you can easily pin down into a long-term type of relationship. He's on the move the whole time, led by his curiosity and his need to discover more and learn everything. If he gets a bit of information, he's chasing that down until he knows all there is to know. So then there is the plot and my issues I had with it. So these stories are a little bit like a fairy tale, in that they're episodic. I don't need a hero who has to save the world 1 time or 5 times. Not everything has to be that grand. We have that time when Quoth hunted down the bandits, and that time when he spent the night with Valerian, and we have that time that he saved the 2 girls from being enslaved. And it's really nice. It's really like a modern day fantasy. Like, this character is strong enough and can work in so many settings, in so many situations, that he will somehow live on. That's how I feel about it. But then there are issues to the plot, as I said, with the tension not being there. A couple of times there are interesting stories that we just gloss over. Quoth somehow goes on a ship and ends up on the other side at port with all his possessions gone. What happened during that time is glossed over very quickly, and that's kind of annoying. I would have liked to know how Quoth dealt with the pirates. If we have to know his life story in detail, why don't we get that bit too? But again, it's just like I missed an episode in the series. It's not the end of the world, but it is a shame. The really annoying part was when Quoth has this quest in mind. So he goes to a king to try to get himself a patron. And this is his 100% goal. We know Quoth has been struggling with money throughout his life. We know how much this would mean to his music. We know he deserves it. So we're 100% behind this. And the king sends him, he has lots of adventures with the king. Really episodic, really nice, all of them important because all of them working ultimately towards this goal of earning Quoth a patron. And we are 100% behind him. If you like Quoth like I liked him, more than 100% behind him. And I kept reading and digging, searching for that beautiful catharsis of him finally getting what he deserves. And then at the very, very end of the quest, I think I could relate it to a video game. It's like you just have to hand in the quest and get your reward. He goes on a side quest. He's literally, I think, 1 or 2 days walk away from the king's castle, and he decides not to quickly stop by the king. No, he's going to go train with some mercenary monks for 2 months first. And that completely threw me off. Firstly, I have been behind this goal for hours and hours of reading now. How can you just throw that away without giving me the satisfaction? Does Quoth no longer care? Why did I ever care if he doesn't? Okay, so then we have this side quest that he goes on. He's 2 days ride away from his ultimate goal, and for some reason he goes on a 2-month quest to the Arthurian mercenary / monks. He goes to their temple, and so he learns their language, he learns how they speak, and he learns their fighting style. And at first, a friend taught him this because of Quoth's inherent curiosity about everything. But then once there, it's a secret tradition, and if Quoth doesn't succeed in learning it properly, in passing the first level, if he doesn't succeed here, they're going to dismember him, kill him, chop off his hands. And I can't take that seriously. Like, tell me they're going to destroy his loot. We have enough of an emotional connection to his music, and we understand what the loss of a loot does to him to understand why that's a problem. But we know he survives. Old Man Quoth is speaking to us. All his digits. Both his hands. So I really wasn't interested in this side plot. The characters were interesting. The fighting style was interesting. It actually shows him being a novice for the longest time and struggling. But I felt like he could just leave. Because, well, I know he's going to survive anyway. So I just felt like this whole side quest destroyed the tension for a while, because this whole plot line could have been moved to just after the king. Have the king and in his endless curiosity send Quoth to find out about the Arthurians and then learn it. Just give me the satisfaction of the first plot line first, because there's no reason to worry about anything going badly here, because I know what the consequences are and I know that they're impossible. So essentially there are no consequences to him losing, and the consequences to him winning is him learning some fighting style. But because he is never going to die, I know that that fighting style isn't a matter of life or death for him to learn in the first place. So I think that's probably the weakest part of the book, is messy plot lines, to just mix it in too much that it doesn't make sense. So I felt nothing for that entire plot line. You know what else I felt nothing about? Denna. She is Quoth's love interest for most of the book, but I didn't care. I don't like her very much. She alludes to depth every now and then, and she alludes to having a complicated mind and a terrible backstory, but she seems so shallow, and we never actually find out more about her. And Quoth is wonderfully, completely head over heels in love with this girl, but we have no reason to see why. I feel like there are better girls out there, and she's just who he happens to have his eyes on right now. She was built up so much, and I just feel like there's not enough there for me to ship them or to root for them. I kind of wish Quoth would just forget about her and move on. Okay, finally, the debate. Is Quoth an unreliable narrator? I would say 100% yes. And the evidence for this would be the fact that he glosses over some things in this book. He legit is telling us, he's telling us his whole life story in detail. If he's willing to skip over parts of his own story, like the part about how he lost all his possessions before he reached the King of Ventus, would he also not indulge in a little bit of over-exaggeration? Downplaying his faults, exaggerating the features that everybody saw about him. He came out from the forest of the Fae, and everybody knew there was something Fae-like about him. And he can be so dramatic. Honestly, I don't think it's above him. But I would say 100% I found the evidence and I bookmarked it as soon as I found it. So there's this part in the story where Quoth is in the library and everybody's supposed to be quiet. And there are these rich pricks strutting about and speaking as loudly as they can because they don't care about your rules. They're too rich to care. And Quoth stands up to them and he tells them, in a very witty, charming way, of course, that they should shut up. And I shit you not, everybody clapped. Is this not? Like, if you heard the story anywhere else than in a written black on white, would you believe this shit? No, nobody would believe this. This is ridiculous. And then everybody clapped. In the quiet library, where everybody was just minding their own business, they stopped to listen to my conversation with the bullies and then applauded me. No, I'm sorry, no. So I feel like here that unreliable narrator he overplayed his hand a bit with that. It's just too much. So without a shadow of a doubt, I have to say that is enough evidence for me to believe it. It's just in an otherwise grounded story, and considering that we know who this character is, he's definitely not reliable here. And then the way one night with one woman completely changes him, and he's all of a sudden knows what's going on in the mind of every woman he meets. No, I don't know. It's just a couple of things are just a little bit too far-fetched, but I've come to find it a charming part of the story, a part of the story that just gives Quoth some more characterization of this is how he would tell his story. And it's that mischievous, boastful teenage boy who I honestly love to bits at this point. But he's definitely not being entirely honest with us. He's being entirely honest with how he views himself. And that's good enough for me. So, I hope you guys are staying safe. I hope you guys are staying inside. If you're not, they might extend this and I need out. I'm going to try to get as much reading done as possible. And I will see you next week for another book review. Ta-ta.